There are two types of Star Wars fans: people who fell in love with the story, and people who fell in love with the brand. If the brand is your thing, the theme parks, the merchandise, the new show every 8 months, the logo that still delivers that automatic warm feeling, this video isn't for you, and you can go enjoy it in peace. But if what got you was the mythology, the weight of it, the idea that a force bound the galaxy together, and that a handful of ancient warrior monks had dedicated their entire lives to understanding it, then I need to tell you something you already know, but haven't heard anyone say out loud. Disney doesn't occasionally write bad Jedi. Disney can't write any other kind of Jedi except one. There is a single template, a single archetype, a single character the institution reaches for every time a Jedi needs to appear on screen. That character is, to borrow the most efficient description available from the evidence, a miserable loser who has turned his back on the Jedi ways. The only Jedi Disney knows, the only one they've ever produced. And the reason this constitutes a structural ceiling, rather than a run of creative bad luck, is Obi-Wan Kenobi, the one character in the entire Disney Star Wars canon for whom this template wasn't just artistically uninspired, but narratively impossible to justify. Disney deployed it anyway. That single decision transforms suspicion into proof. So this isn't a rant, it's closing arguments. The jury, which is you, already suspects the verdict. What you haven't had is the evidence organized into a form you can articulate. That's what this is. The seed was planted in 2015. J.J. Abrams built The Force Awakens around a single foundational premise. Luke Skywalker, the most powerful Force user alive, has chosen to be absent. The galaxy burns. The most capable person available has decided that unavailability is the correct response. The narrative frames his location and his motives as a sacred mystery worth reverence, rather than a dereliction of duty worth confronting. The lightsaber belonging to his father and his grandfather before him calls to a young woman across a cluttered basement because it has been separated from its owner by his own withdrawal. That is the heroic baseline of the Skywalker mythology, established in the opening frames of the Disney era. A man in hiding. Thanks, JJ. Whether Abrams consciously invented what became a repeating institutional pattern is analytical territory, not settled fact. The primary source documentation for that specific attribution is thin, and it's worth being honest about that. What is verifiable is the structural fingerprint he left. The first Disney Star Wars film told its audience that heroism is something a legend walks away from, that power and responsibility can be set down when the weight becomes too heavy, and that the proper dramatic framing for a great Jedi is absence. Rian Johnson picked up that fingerprint and turned it into a full philosophical manifesto. In The Last Jedi, Luke Skywalker isn't simply hiding. He has constructed an entire intellectual architecture to justify the hiding. Johnson wrote and directed the film. His stated creative intent was deconstruction. A fallible Luke is more human. Subverting the legend generates more dramatic energy than fulfilling it. These are defensible positions in the abstract, held by reasonable people. Whether the specific choice was justifiable in isolation is a separate debate from the one we're having here. The images Johnson gave that choice are specific, and they stick. Luke Skywalker, the farm boy who refused to execute his own father on the Emperor's direct order, who walked alone into Jabba's palace and negotiated from a position of impossible confidence, tosses Rey's offered lightsaber over his shoulder the moment she presents it. 2 seconds. The gesture is designed to land as a joke before it registers as a wound. He drinks milk from a sea creature on a gray cliff face. He delivers elaborate philosophical arguments for why the Jedi Order deserved to end. When Rey arrives carrying the weight of a burning galaxy, his answer is philosophical obstruction from a position of deliberate uselessness. Yoda's Force Ghost has to physically manifest, Yoda, dead for decades, before Luke will consider engaging with the person who needs him. Rain, rock, and cold ocean water. That is the environment Johnson built for the living legend of the Jedi Order. The Broken Hermit didn't arrive in the Disney era as a villain. It arrived as a prestige choice, armored with authorial intention and the critical vocabulary of deconstruction. The institution absorbed the lesson. The miserable Force abandoner had been given a major motion picture's worth of creative validation, and the template was in the building. Buildings remember what worked. Obi-Wan Kenobi is where the template stops being a pattern worth documenting and becomes a case worth prosecuting. When Revenge of the Sith ends, Obi-Wan carries a newborn boy across a Tatooine desert at dusk and places him in Owen Lars's arms. The twin suns bleed orange across the horizon. The stillness of that image is deceptive because Obi-Wan isn't retiring in that moment. He is accepting what might be the most demanding, sustained mission a Jedi has ever been assigned. Go to Tatooine. Watch over Luke Skywalker. Maintain your cover across years and decades. Keep yourself combat ready, keep yourself Force attuned, and wait for the moment the galaxy is ready for what comes next. A soldier settling into a very long, very quiet watch, purposeful, committed, vigilant by necessity, because the mission demands it, and the mission has no end date. The Obi-Wan Kenobi series, directed by Deborah Chow, is set 10 years after Revenge of the Sith. That is the verified, anchored timeline. 9 years before A New Hope. In A New Hope, the film this series is architecturally obligated to lead into, Obi-Wan carries himself with the specific, unhurried confidence of someone who has kept his instrument in tune across 19 years of quiet watch. He walks into the Mos Eisley Cantina, a room packed with creatures who would end his life for entertainment, and when a confrontation erupts at the bar, the lightsaber is out and the threat neutralized before most patrons have processed that anything happened. He doesn't reach for the Force, like a man reconnecting with a dormant ability. He uses it with the ease of someone explaining something obvious, demonstrating it to a farm boy who has never seen it the way a craftsman demonstrates a tool they have never put down. When he tells Luke that the Force is real, that Jedi existed, that the galaxy once held something worth believing in, the delivery carries the unbroken authority of a man whose faith never wavered. No visible residue of decade-long psychological collapse. No fumbled reconnection with powers gone cold from years of deliberate neglect. He is exactly what his mission required him to be. The series shows us someone who has failed that mission entirely. Obi-Wan in the Kenobi series is plagued by nightmares of Anakin's fall, living in hollow exile, refusing Force use, flinching from his own identity. The cave he inhabits reads as defeat rather than tactical positioning. His work in the settlement, slaughtering animals for credits, keeping his head down, dissolving into gray anonymity, belongs to someone who abandoned his post long ago, not someone quietly executing a decades-long guardianship. The show frames this as tragedy, which would be emotionally coherent territory if the specific tragedy hadn't already been fully processed in Revenge of the Sith, on the volcanic riverbank at Mustafar, in one of the most devastating scenes in the entire saga. That grief was sealed, completely, with maximum dramatic intensity. Reopening it a decade later, without any new dramatic mechanism to justify the reopening, is the template searching the character for a room to occupy, finding one already sealed, and moving in regardless. The sharpest edge. For a Broken Hermit arc to make any narrative sense in this 9-year window, the series would also need to show us the recovery. The arithmetic from a shattered Obi-Wan to a fully operational Cantina Jedi requires a rehabilitation arc spanning 9 years of screen-free time. The show makes no such attempt. The gap between the man depicted and the man A New Hope established simply opens in front of the viewer and keeps widening with each episode. The writers either didn't notice the continuity problem or decided the template was worth more than the solution. Neither interpretation reflects well on the institution. Ewan McGregor gives everything the script allows. The performance is genuinely committed, emotionally honest, and deserving of better material. Deborah Chow isn't Rian Johnson. Her credits are separate, her sensibilities are her own, and she shares no writing DNA with the people who constructed the TLJ template. A completely different creative team, working from a different character, in a different era of the timeline, under different canonical constraints, producing identical output. 3 separate sets of hands reaching into the same drawer and pulling out the same tool. That is the argument at its smallest readable form. 3 exhibits. The point is accumulation, so this moves fast. Vader's declared priority throughout the series is locating Obi-Wan Kenobi. Reva, the third sister, played by Moses Ingram, is his instrument for that hunt. Aggressive, capable, politically motivated, willing to compromise other operations to advance her search. The Empire operates galaxy-spanning communications infrastructure and the bureaucratic machinery of an occupying government. Audiences documented, with enough consistency to constitute a recognizable pattern of fan analysis, that Reva apparently never distributes Obi-Wan's name, description, or image to the ground-level troops conducting the physical search beneath her command. The soldiers appear not to know who they're hunting. The scene mechanics here carry low confidence in the research record. This is documented audience response, not verified production material. But when viewers walk away from a manhunt plotline genuinely uncertain whether the manhunters knew their target's name, the connective tissue of the storytelling has failed at the most basic level of craft. The Inquisitors in the series aren't covert operators. They carry red lightsabers, blades casting crimson light across civilian faces in populated settlements, with witnesses present in the depicted scenes. This is established by the series itself. 9 years later, Luke Skywalker has never heard of the Jedi. Obi-Wan must explain to a teenager who grew up in the same desert region what a Jedi actually is. The specific scene documentation carries low confidence, as verified production detail. But the depicted situation creates a continuity problem the timeline can't accommodate. The Empire's force-using enforcers were conducting visible operations with unmistakable weapons in communities where people live, talk, and remember things. Luke's ignorance was required by the hero's journey setup of A New Hope. So ignorant he remained, regardless of what the surrounding canon had established. Haja Estri is established explicitly as a fraud, a con artist with no force sensitivity and no access to Imperial intelligence. His entire livelihood depends on his marks not knowing what genuine force ability looks like from the outside. He nevertheless arrives at the right moment with the right intelligence about which room contains the trap, and the episode provides no explanation for how he possesses this knowledge. The scene mechanics carry low confidence in the research record, but the reported situation is coherent. The writers needed the beat. The beat required knowledge Haja had no plausible mechanism for possessing, and the knowledge arrived unearned because the template required the scene regardless of how the scene justified itself. 3 failures of internal logic. Single 6-episode series, all clustering around the same plot mechanics. The writers were tracking the template downward rather than building the story outward. Earning a beat requires starting from what the story has established and constructing toward the beat honestly. The template doesn't require earning. It only requires execution. The Rotten Tomatoes numbers run parallel to this. Critics scored the series at 83%. The audience scored it 63%. That 20-point gap is the numerical signature of a show that looks right and registers as false. Critics evaluate execution, framing, performance, pacing, production design, all of which the series delivers competently. Story-loyal audiences evaluate whether something is true to the thing they invested in, whether the internal logic holds, whether the weight is real. The gap between 83 and 63 is, in compressed numerical form, the entire argument of this video. One more link and the chain is complete. Din Djarin is a warrior from a culture with documented, violent, canonical historical entanglement with Force users. The Mandalorian Jedi conflict is established lore. The Empire, whose ideological origin story explicitly involves hunting down and exterminating the Jedi Order across a galaxy that was, within living memory, full of them, has been the dominant political reality of his entire adult life. The Clone Wars ended within living memory of the Mandalorian's events. The Inquisitors were active within recent decades. The Reddit thread asking, "How has the Mandalorian never heard of the Jedi?" captures the nervous system response of an audience flagging an inconsistency before the conscious mind has fully named it. The template requires Jedi to be absent and obscure, because absence and obscurity are the atmosphere in which the broken hermit archetype breathes. So the galaxy was written to forget them, regardless of whether that forgetting was plausible given the actual calendar of events. Abrams planted the mythology of the absent hero in 2015. Johnson elaborated the philosophical defense of abandonment in 2017. By the time Chow's writer's room was operational, the broken hermit had stopped being a pitch evaluated against alternatives. Walking into that room with a fully capable, vigilant, force-attuned Obi-Wan, the Guardian executing his mission, sharp and present across a long and lonely watch, would have felt like swimming upstream. The institutional current was already running, and institutional currents don't require consensus. They require gravity. Gravity is silent. The Kenobi failure is diagnostic precisely because it occurred under the one set of conditions where even the institutional default had no narrative excuse. His established future, the calm, capable Jedi Master of A New Hope, was sitting in the canon across 45 years of established cinema, telling any writer who cared to look exactly who this man needed to be during the 9-year gap. The show wrote the only Jedi they know how to write, in the one instance where that Jedi demonstrably couldn't have existed. After The Last Jedi, the dominant response among story-loyal audiences was hot and volatile, specific, galvanizing fury. Arguments still running years later, comment sections and video essays generating heat long after the theatrical run ended. That anger was rational. Rage at a story that has failed you is itself a form of investment. It requires the belief that the failure was avoidable, that the right people in the right room could have produced something worthy of the mythology you loved. Rage requires hope. You can't be that furious at a door unless some part of you still believes it might open. The Kenobi series produced something quieter and harder to name. For the portion of the story-loyal audience that had survived The Last Jedi and extended the franchise another chance, had shown up willing to be convinced, willing to be wrong about their despair, the series delivered not fresh anger, but the specific flat feeling of a suspicion becoming a settled fact. Betrayal runs hot. Confirmation runs quiet. The transition from rage to indifference after Kenobi isn't apathy. Apathy is disengagement from something you never fully engaged with. What story-loyal fans experienced was the completion of an evidentiary case. The evidence was in. The pattern was documented across enough distinct instances, different directors, different characters, different eras, no shared writing credits, that the accident defense was no longer structurally available. Luke Skywalker as a broken hermit is bad writing, and the case against it has been made thoroughly elsewhere. But Johnson had genuine creative room to move. Luke's post-Return of the Jedi history had never been canonically established, and a new story could be built in that space. Obi-Wan had no such room. His canonical endpoint was sitting in A New Hope, fully operational, decades of quiet vigilance legible in every unhurried movement, 9 years after the broken man the series depicted. The template ran anyway, not despite the evidence against it, indifferent to the evidence against it. That indifference on the institution's part eventually met with indifference on the audience's part. The emotional math is clean. Certainty has a different register than hope. Hope runs hot. It wants, it strains. It can be hurt by the next disappointment. Certainty runs quiet. You can't genuinely disappoint someone who has already finished counting the evidence and written the verdict. The quiet, tired letting go that story-loyal fans arrived at somewhere during or after the Kenobi series, that isn't the failure of their investment. It's the completion of it. The prosecution presented its case. The pattern held. The same template appeared in the one circumstance where the excuse of accident was no longer available, applied to the one character whose established future made it provably wrong. The verdict writes itself. And verdicts, once written, don't require ongoing grief. There is one Jedi Disney knows how to write. 10 years and multiple productions have been available to prove otherwise. The evidence is organized, the chain is complete, and if you're watching this because some part of you needed someone to finally say that out loud with the receipts in hand, you already knew. You just needed the evidence presented in order. Subscribe for more like this.